You're about to talk yourself out of something that isn't dead yet. A lot of men have talked themselves out of potential relationships that never actually ended. Not because the woman rejected them, not because she lost interest, not because something terrible happened. They talked themselves out of it because they couldn't handle not knowing. They needed an answer immediately, and when they didn't get one, they created one. You've probably done it yourself. You meet a woman, the conversation starts well, she laughs at your jokes, asks questions, seems engaged, and for a moment, everything feels easy. Then one day she takes longer than usual to reply. Maybe she used to answer within an hour, and now it's evening, and you've heard nothing. Suddenly, your mind goes to work. She's losing interest. She's talking to another guy. She was never serious. You replay every interaction looking for evidence. You examine her last message like it's a crime scene. By the time she finally replies, you've already convinced yourself the connection is dying. The strange thing is that most of the suffering happens before anything has actually happened. That's what makes this trap so dangerous. You're not reacting to reality anymore. You're reacting to a story. And stories are easy to create when information is missing. Your brain hates uncertainty. It wants to close the gap. It wants a clear answer. So when you don't know what she's thinking, your imagination steps in and starts writing the script for you. The problem is that imagination rarely writes happy endings. It writes worst-case scenarios. It tells you she's pulling away. It tells you you're being played. It tells you not to get your hopes up. And because those thoughts feel protective, you trust them. You think you're being realistic when you're actually making assumptions. The result is that you start acting differently. Your energy changes. Your confidence changes. The way you text changes. The way you show up changes. What makes this even more complicated is that attraction doesn't move in a perfectly straight line. Real life isn't like the movies. People have busy weeks. People get distracted. People second-guess themselves. People have moments where they're excited and moments where they're unsure. That doesn't automatically mean interest is gone. Yet many men treat every small shift as if it's a final judgment. One slower reply becomes proof. One canceled plan becomes proof. One quiet day becomes proof. Meanwhile, the woman may have no idea this entire trial is taking place inside your head. Before you decide she's not interested, before you convince yourself it's over, before you pull away or start chasing reassurance, there are a few things you need to understand. Because sometimes the biggest thing standing between you and the truth isn't her behavior. It's the story you're telling yourself about it. She didn't text back for hours, and your brain filled in the rest. One of the fastest ways to create unnecessary pain for yourself is to mistake a lack of information for bad news. It usually starts with something small. You send a message. Nothing dramatic. Maybe it's a joke about something you talked about on your date. Maybe it's a simple question. Maybe it's just you keeping the conversation going. An hour passes, then 2, then 4. Eventually, you check your phone again, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't. Now the conversation isn't just sitting in your messages, it's sitting in your head. Every time you see your screen light up and it's not her, the story gets bigger. You start remembering how quickly she used to reply. You compare today's silence to yesterday's attention. You look for clues that explain what's happening. Before long, you've created an entire narrative from one unanswered text. The funny part is that if she replied right this second with a completely normal message, most of that narrative would instantly disappear. That's how fragile it was to begin with. Yet, while you're waiting, it feels completely real. The reason this happens is because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Human beings would often rather have a bad answer than no answer at all. At least a bad answer feels definite. At least it gives you something to react to. So your mind starts filling in blanks that don't actually need filling. Maybe she's busy at work. Maybe she's with friends. Maybe she saw the message and wanted to reply later when she had time to focus. Maybe she's having a rough day. Maybe she simply forgot. There are dozens of possible explanations. Yet the brain tends to grab the one explanation that hurts the most and treat it like a fact. That's why so many men end up emotionally reacting to situations that haven't even happened. They aren't responding to reality. They're responding to possibilities. And possibilities can become incredibly convincing when they're repeated often enough inside your own head. What's important to understand is that attraction isn't measured in hours. A woman doesn't go from genuinely interested to completely uninterested because she took an afternoon to answer a text. Real interest is usually revealed through patterns, not isolated moments. That's something people forget when emotions get involved. A single delayed reply tells you almost nothing. A consistent pattern of disinterest tells you something. There's a difference. One requires patience. The other provides evidence. If you're constantly trying to draw conclusions from individual moments, you'll spend most of your dating life confused. You'll be reacting to shadows instead of substance. And the worst part is that the pressure you create inside yourself often spills into your behavior. Suddenly you're sending follow-up messages you didn't need to send. Suddenly you're seeking reassurance she never asked you to seek. Suddenly you're treating a woman like she owes you certainty when she's still getting to know you. That's where things begin to go wrong. Not because she wasn't interested, but because your fear got ahead of the facts. The date felt great. Then everything got weird. This is the part that confuses a lot of men because it feels so contradictory. You spend an evening together and everything seems to click. The conversation flows naturally. Neither of you is staring at your phone. She laughs at things that aren't even that funny. She asks questions that go beyond surface-level small talk. Hours pass faster than expected. When you leave, you're already thinking about seeing her again. Maybe she even says she had a great time. Maybe she hugs you a little longer than necessary. Maybe she tells you to text her when you get home. You walk away feeling good about it. Then 2 days later, the energy feels completely different. Her replies are shorter, the excitement seems lower. The momentum you thought was building suddenly feels like it's slowing down. That's when panic starts creeping in. You begin wondering whether you imagined the whole thing. The mistake many men make is assuming that a great date automatically means a woman has already made up her mind. But attraction rarely works that way. You can enjoy someone's company, feel chemistry, have a genuinely good experience, and still need time to figure out what you want. Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever met someone you liked but weren't completely certain about after one interaction? Have you ever needed more information before deciding where things stood? Most people have. Yet when a woman does the same thing, many men interpret it as rejection. They think if she were truly interested, there would be no hesitation, no uncertainty, no variation in her behavior. Real life is usually messier than that. People are balancing work, family, stress, past experiences, and their own doubts. Attraction can exist alongside uncertainty. Those two things are not enemies. In fact, they often show up together in the early stages of dating. What usually hurts men in this situation isn't the uncertainty itself. It's the expectation they had before it arrived. They expected a straight line. They expected today's energy to perfectly match yesterday's energy. They expected every interaction to confirm what they already hoped was true. Then reality showed up and reminded them that human beings don't move in predictable patterns. Sometimes interest grows gradually. Sometimes it stalls before moving forward again. Sometimes people pull back briefly because they're trying to figure out their own feelings. None of this guarantees success, of course. Some connections do fade. Some women do lose interest. But if you treat every fluctuation as proof that things are over, you'll sabotage yourself long before the situation has revealed what it actually is. The strongest position you can be in is not blind optimism or blind pessimism. It's patience. The ability to let things unfold without forcing an answer before the answer exists. That's a skill most people never develop, and it's exactly why so many promising situations end inside someone's head before they end in real life. What she keeps doing matters more than what she said once. One conversation can mislead you. One text can mislead you. One awkward interaction can mislead you. That's why paying attention to individual moments is such a dangerous way to judge someone's interest. A woman might tell you she's busy this week and genuinely mean it. She might say she's exhausted from work and disappear for a day. She might seem distracted during one conversation because something else is happening in her life. None of those things automatically tell you how she feels about you. Yet many men treat single moments like final evidence. They hear one disappointing sentence and ignore everything else. They focus on one canceled plan and forget the 3 times she made an effort to see them. They become so obsessed with one piece of information that they stop looking at the bigger picture. But attraction reveals itself through repetition, not what happens once, what keeps happening over time. That's why patterns matter so much. A woman who is interested usually finds ways to stay connected, even when life gets busy. She may not text exactly how you want. She may not communicate perfectly. She may not move at the pace you would prefer. But she continues showing up in some form. She replies. She asks questions. She remembers details about things you've told her. She brings up stories from previous conversations. She makes room for you in her schedule when she can. She reaches out occasionally without needing a reason. None of these things are dramatic. That's the point. Real interest is often much quieter than people expect. It's not always grand gestures and obvious signals. Sometimes it's simply consistency. The woman who keeps finding reasons to stay in your life is telling you far more than the woman who says all the right things but disappears whenever action is required. This is also where many men accidentally create confusion for themselves. Instead of watching what a woman consistently does, they become attached to what they hope a certain moment means. They replay a compliment she gave them 3 weeks ago. They analyze a flirty comment from a date. They hold on to one encouraging interaction while ignoring everything that's happened since. But attraction isn't something you measure through isolated highlights. You measure it through ongoing behavior. Imagine someone telling you they care about you while repeatedly showing you that you're an afterthought. Eventually, the actions become more important than the words. The same principle applies here. If you're trying to understand where you stand with a woman, stop zooming in on individual moments and start stepping back. Look at the pattern. Look at what keeps happening. Look at whether she's making room for you in her life over time. Because the truth usually isn't hiding in one text message. It's sitting right there in the pattern you've been overlooking. The moment you start chasing answers, things usually get worse. There's a point in a lot of dating situations where the problem stops being uncertainty and starts being the way you react to uncertainty. That's an important distinction because most men never notice when that shift happens. At first, they're simply interested in a woman and trying to figure out where things stand. That's normal. But then the questions start multiplying. Why hasn't she replied yet? Why did she seem different yesterday? Why did she use fewer emojis? Why hasn't she suggested another date? Every unanswered question creates another one. Instead of letting the situation breathe, they start trying to force clarity out of it. They check their phone constantly, they reread old conversations, they look for hidden meanings in ordinary messages. Eventually, they become less focused on enjoying the connection and more focused on solving a mystery. The woman goes from being someone they're getting to know to becoming a puzzle they're desperately trying to figure out. The problem is that people can feel that pressure even when it's never spoken out loud. When your mood depends entirely on how quickly someone replies, your behavior starts changing in subtle ways. You become more reactive, more impatient, more sensitive to small things. You send messages not because you genuinely want to connect, but because you're looking for reassurance. You ask questions not because you're curious, but because you're hoping for certainty. And certainty is something nobody can give you in the early stages of dating. Not honestly, anyway. The reality is that attraction develops in an environment where people have room to choose each other. The more desperately you try to lock down an answer, the more tension you bring into a situation that was supposed to feel natural. Suddenly, every interaction carries extra weight. Every text feels like a test. Every delay feels like a threat. That's exhausting for you, And it can become exhausting for the other person, too. What's ironic is that many men think chasing answers will make them feel better, but it usually has the opposite effect. The more you seek reassurance, the more reassurance you need. The more you analyze, the more things you find to analyze. It's like scratching an itch that keeps getting worse every time you touch it. The healthier move is often the harder move, allowing uncertainty to exist without immediately trying to eliminate it. If she's interested, time will usually reveal that. If she's not interested, time will reveal that too. Either way, constantly chasing confirmation won't change the outcome. What it does change is your state of mind. Instead of living your life, you're sitting around waiting for signals. Instead of enjoying the process of getting to know someone, you're trying to predict the ending before the story has reached the middle. That's why some men end up emotionally exhausted after only a few weeks of talking to someone. They're carrying a weight that doesn't actually belong to them, the need to know everything right now. And that's often the very thing that makes dating feel far harder than it needs to be. Stop asking, "Does she like me?" and start looking at this instead. The question that traps a lot of men is surprisingly simple. Does she like me? On the surface, it seems reasonable. Of course you want to know. Of course you're curious. But the problem with that question is that it pulls your attention towards something you can't fully know. You don't have access to her thoughts. You don't know every feeling she's sorting through. You don't know whether she's excited, cautious, distracted, conflicted, or still figuring things out herself. The more you obsess over that question, the more you end up trying to read minds instead of reading reality. You become focused on decoding signals rather than observing what is actually happening in front of you. And that's where confusion starts taking over. A much better question is this: am I getting enough interest to keep moving forward? Notice how different that feels. You're no longer trying to reach inside someone else's head. You're simply looking at what exists. Is she responding when you reach out? Is she participating in conversations? Does she seem engaged when you're together? Is she making some effort to keep the connection alive? Is the situation moving somewhere, even if it's moving slowly? Those are things you can actually observe. They don't require mind reading. They don't require endless analysis. They require honesty. Because sometimes the answer is yes. The interest is there, but you've been too focused on getting certainty to notice it. Other times the answer is no. The effort is one-sided. The connection isn't progressing. And accepting that truth is healthier than spending months searching for hidden signs that aren't there. This shift changes something important. It puts your attention back where it belongs. Instead of trying to determine whether you're secretly winning or losing, you're evaluating whether the situation deserves your time and energy. That's a completely different mindset. You're no longer waiting for a woman to hand you a verdict about your worth. You're observing whether the connection is giving both people something to build on. And if it isn't, you don't need to hate her. You don't need to convince her. You don't need to chase explanations. You simply recognize what's in front of you and move accordingly. That's what emotionally steady people do. They don't demand certainty before taking their next step. They look at the reality of the situation and respond to it. Not the fantasy, not the fear, not the story in their head. Just the reality.